Yeah, we're live. It is 7:44. A little bit late. Working on the fort today, getting the elevator portion up, so I'm really excited. Got the basically the main support for the elevator section up, which is welded out of steel beams, and a mount basically for the hoist. And then now I've got to put up. I have other rectangular tubing and the channel for the wheel assemblies, the trolley assemblies, and then I can kind of get it all up there and hook it up. I'm excited. But like anything, and this goes toward any of these projects that we're working on. When you're working on a vehicle or something, and you're trying to get anything done, it's like, okay, I want to do this. Okay, in order to do this, first I got to do this, and then this. I got to do these other things, all of these other things before I can do the thing that I want to get done, before I can check that off my list. I can't check it off my list because I got to do all these 8 other things to get it done. It's like when you're taking a part off your car. Okay, I got to change the starter. Okay, well, unfortunately, to change the starter, we have to take off the intake manifold or take off the half shaft or drop the exhaust or whatever all of the things are to actually, get to the thing that we're trying to get to make it work. That's what this is like. It's like, okay, I want to paint the beams. Okay, well, first you have to clean them all. Well, you have to drill and tap them and do all of the holes that you need, and either through holes and when you do through holes, since it's rectangular tubing, you have to do one set on the front side, one set on the back side. So that's like, for every hole that you go through, it's like 6 holes, because you got to do a starter hole, and then you got to go up size, and then you got to go to the finish size, and you got to do that on the other side, and then you got to wipe everything down. And I used gas to wipe everything down, and then I used alcohol to wipe everything down the second time, so you got to do that twice. It's just a nonstop. And again, that's how these projects are. Okay, I want to go out like on the turbo sprint. I need to go out. I want to put the axles in. Okay, well, before you do that, you have to make sure that all the motor mounts and everything's that the motor's in place, and the trans and everything's secured and tight. Well, some of the bushings are not good on those, so I got to fix the bushings, and then yada. Oh, you guys know what it's like. But tonight, actually, we want to talk about. You can see the thumbnail that I have up. It was Jaws themed. I just wanted to post this because I'm a big fan, actually, of Jaws. And also, my son got me these. He went to the movies, and they had these things, and he's like, "Oh yeah, my dad's gonna love this. This is awesome." So I got the big Jaws theme. It's from the billboard that they had, and that they put the shark thing on, and it was the Welcome to Amity thing. And then the thing that's even the coolest, that's cool enough, but the thing that's even cooler is the drink that you get along with your popcorn for the movie is the barrels that they use to hold the shark up, to tire the shark out. You shoot it with a harpoon and attach the barrel to it. And then that way the shark can't ever go under, because you can't pull that, it's like you trying to swim with a beach ball or a flotation device or something, try to swim underwater with it. It's just too hard to do. And so we got that. But we're not talking about Jaws tonight, but I just thought it was cool that he got that for me. But what we are talking about is, speaking of bigger boats, is the Turbo Tahoe. So my question is for tonight is, can we have too much? In fact, that will be our poll for tonight. Sorry, poll. Can the Turbo ever be too responsive? Okay, can the Turbo ever be too responsive? Like, can you have basically too much boost response? Can the boost response be too much for you? So, and the reason that I ask is, you guys know that Jimmy had been working on the Tahoe. He put the Truck Plus camshaft in it, which is good. Did a bunch of NA testing on it. Now he's put the turbo back on, and he's run the GTX 3584 RS turbo that we have, and ran it with the 8.2 or 8.3 housing, and then also with the 121 housing now. And now he's taken it out and driven on the street. He's like, wow, this has all the part throttle boost and all the boost. We'll show you guys some video of how responsive it is, but he's like, it's got all the boost like at 2000 RPM or something. So the question is as you're rolling in, is it too responsive? Is that really a thing? We think now, after doing this testing and having it in the vehicle, that unless this turbo was going to be on something small, a 2-liter or something like that, that probably for the LS guys, the 121 housing, given its response on the street, that's probably the way to go. And then obviously the G42 if you want to make even more power. But you know, the turbo, one of the guys that we did a live feed, one of our customers has already got 9s with it, and admittedly that's in a good drag race car, but it did make enough power to do that. And we know the kind of power that it can make anyways, because we've run it on the dyno, you know, plenty of times. And it's really for the guy that wants, like we're talking about tonight, the guy that wants a like ultra responsive turbo and still be able to make pretty good power with it. You know, it's not going to be the 1,000 horsepower thing, because that's not, if you get a 1,000 horsepower turbo, you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower. And then after that, you go, okay, now how can I make that 1,000 horsepower turbo responsive? That's not this. This is an ultra responsive turbo. You're not going to get to 1,000 horsepower with it. You just can't do that because the turbo size isn't there. It isn't there to support that. So that's a different thing. But you know, you have to decide going in, and people have already done this in the same way that they decided that I don't want chop in my camshaft, or you know, I want a smooth idle, or I want fuel mileage, or I do want chop, or I want to be able to use a stock converter. They've already made all of those decisions, and they're like, okay, I want 500 or 600 horsepower, whatever, at the tire, and then this is a really good thing for me, and it is. And then you decide, okay, what's the next best thing? And the interesting thing about this test is that, like I said, when the Tahoe is driving around, it already has the Truck Plus cam, which is the bigger of our, it's bigger of our 3 cams now. So we got the Ripper camshaft, the low buck truck, and then the Truck Plus. This car, the Tahoe, has a stock converter in it. So it's a 5.3, and Jimmy's, you know, the Tahoe's like that. We normally would recommend a converter, and you're with this camshaft, and particularly on a 4.8, but it's driving around and working just fine, especially on a lockup converter. That seems to work out fairly well. But that camshaft with this turbo is still like lightning response rate. So it's working really, really well. So it's a good combination. So even with the, and admittedly, it's not a huge cam, but the bigger of our cams that we sell, it's doing well. And the other cams, the low buck truck camshaft and the Ripper camshaft, would have even more response if that's what you wanted. You know, I think if you're looking at a combination, you could go with more turbo like this and the smaller or more camshaft like this and the smaller turbo, and it still works great. You can go with any three of the camshafts that we have. If you wanted to go with like the G42 turbo, where it's 1,000 horsepower turbo, but you also were trying to get better low speed response, then maybe the smaller cam, like we recommended many, many times, you know, the longer runner intake manifolds, all of that stuff that helps low speed response. And yet you still have, you know, your 1,000 horsepower turbo, so you can make as much as you want. So again, it's all about the initial choice for your combination. Do I want 1,000 plus? Do I not want 1,000 plus? That's the big thing. And then, okay, now what do I want to do? Do I want to make a little bit more with the smaller turbo? Do I want to have a little better response with the bigger turbo? All of that stuff is possible. But know that once you've made the big decision, I have a super responsive turbo, the adjustment that you can do for that in like adding, okay, we've added the Truck Plus cam, or we've added an even bigger camshaft than that. You'll start trading response. And then also the amount that you can shift that, not really a lot. You know, you can't fundamentally change it. And then the same thing with the bigger turbo. If you put a G42 on it and you put the milder camshaft in it, it's not going to make that thing as responsive as the 3584, because you just can't get there. You can make it a little bit better, but not all the way better. You know, they're different things, and those are the big things, and the other things we're working on, obviously, as I said, are the small things. But lots of testing going on. It's very, very cool. I'm excited about that turbo, and I've been getting beat up by Chad and Brian Tooley and these guys about us going to you guys need to come to, you need to go to LS Fest. You guys need to do all that stuff. So we're talking about that for next season, doing some trips, and then if we can get the 4L80E in the Tahoe, maybe take the Tahoe, and that would be a good road trip kind of vehicle, and a good thing to tow a trailer if we brought a trailer so that we could have displays up and stuff, and also just take the Tahoe and run it down the track and kind of see, just to kind of have fun with it. It'd be cool. But we'll see what you guys got going on. How hard is the Turbo 5.3 Ecotech 3 Silverado? I don't know what Ecotech 3 is. Just tell me what year the 5.3 is, and we'll let you know. 5.3 LS random misfire bank 1. 3 of the 4 cylinders. Plugs are good. Wires are good. Coils are good. Compression test is good. Fuel pump is good. No air leaks. Cylinder leak down next. Yeah, you could check the cylinders. I would doubt very seriously that you have 3 or 4 bad cylinders. That doesn't seem right. I can almost guarantee you that it would seem more likely that it's one of those things that you're talking about. It could be a if you did a dynamic compression test or a you could do a compression test. You could do a leak down test. Maybe it's a lifter problem or a spring problem. You don't have traction, too much response isn't a good thing. Yeah, you can. That's a good point. You could, you can overpower the available traction. Awesome shirt. Yeah, this is my Dyno. My wife made this for me. 2-step can make a large turbo spool very well. Yeah, there are ways to improve spool. Remember the Honda CRV I had with low compression? The rings could not be removed without hurting the pistons. We took a new ring and tried to put it on. It would not fit. Lands are too tight, bad pistons. Yeah, so they've crushed the ring lands, which is usually a detonation thing. With ring lands like that, that's not good. I would also check when I see that on a piston, when the ring is seized in the ring land, I like to look at the bearings too, because sometimes the bearings are hammered. Because if you got detonation enough to hurt that piston, sometimes they can hurt the bearings as well. And you don't want to fix that and not, and still have a problem with the bearings. Because that would not be good. Pinch rings, yeah, it's not good. You can see that, although if you get detonation like that, a lot of times broken ring lands are, if you get the piston to seize, get the rings to seize. Got 4 new pistons and all new bearings, setting the ring gap slightly larger than stock. There you go. Yeah, I don't think that the more ring gap is ever going to hurt you. But Richard, what about all the blow by? Sure. You'll have a lot of blow by when you break a piston. You'll have all the blow by. Probably see crankcase pressure. Yeah, the rings are not sealing. And I've seen rings, like we take apart these high mileage junkyard motors. I've seen rings be stuck in the ring grooves, but usually because of buildup. And so a lot of times if you spray stuff in there, even just WD-40, but sometimes we use brake clean or carb clean or whatever and spray it. And if we can get the ring moving and move it back and forth, we can clean up all of that stuff. And once we do that, the rings move fine after that. particularly if you take them out and if they have buildup on the ring itself too. Then you can have a problem like with the big bang motors. We would clean out the grooves with a broken piece of another ring, which we got lots of junkyard motors. And you could do it with you could do it with little screwdrivers and all kinds of stuff, razor blades. We've done all kinds of probably not authorized stuff, but you as long as you get that stuff cleaned out, we put oil in there and then kind of moving around, get it all freed up. And once they're working freely, the things actually work well and they seal up better too. Specs have the second ring gapped at 17 to 22 and the top ring. Yeah, if you're putting together just a factory rebuild and you go to the higher side of their specs that they give, it works pretty well. Top ring is 8 to 14. I know. Not 08, 008, right? Because 80 thousandths would be a lot. Yeah, 8 thousandths is not enough ring gap, not for anything. I think if you had 8 thousandths ring gap and you just went up a long grade, even at part throttle, I think that could be problematic. Near. 008. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Cruising the coast starts in 2 weeks. Massive week-long car show. Should I make both the top and bottom the same as I did my Mopar small block, or should we do the top at? I would split it the way if you're just rebuilding a stock one, I would use particularly if it's a Honda, I would use Honda specs. So I would do it the way that they suggest because they know what they're doing. And unless you're trying to run boost on it, then you could do the same of both of them. 15 in the bottom and 25. Yeah, 15. And this is a small bore motor too. Because 15 on a 4-inch bore obviously is different than 15 on a 3-inch bore. That would make a difference. Because then the amount of growth. Near. 3.47, 3.5 inches. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, that's 5 thousandths roughly per 17 would be 5 thousandths per inch of bore. And for a stock kind of NA thing, that's should be more than enough. Testing an LQ4 with an M122, and the balancer broke off at 5100. There's a new Dorman replacement. Have you seen that? I haven't seen specifically a Dorman replacement break, but I have seen factory dampers break. Did you have it pinned to the crank? Set up like a Fox body, impressive at part throttle, but peak power before 5,000. What was your thing, Ryan? To do a front end rebuild on the Denali. I've got something going on with the top with my Silverado still too. It's wearing one of the tires, and I'm thinking that it's a tie rod or something. I just replaced the wheel bearing assemblies on both of them. The Honda book says to put the ring at 25 millimeters from the bottom of the cylinder, not at the top 1 inch. Yeah, I don't do it. I don't measure it at the bottom. I'm much more concerned with how the thing seals up near the top than I am at the bottom. There's no compression down at the bottom. Mine's a differential. Yep. Learning manual transmissions and differentials in school. There you go. That's good. Good. You need to learn how to make 460Es stronger. Yeah, the Honda, when I was putting together lots and lots of Hondas, we would go off of and for all the Bonneville motors, I would go off of the factory manual because I had a factory service manual for the, this one was for the Del Sol, I think. And so we would use that for the B16 stuff. And then, but still, I don't know why they would want to take it at the bottom of the bore. You would want that bore to be consistent all the way up. And in fact, a good machine shop would be measuring that to make sure that it is that. Dual keyways on the Dorman. It broke the 3 spokes. That's where ours broke too. Do you have blow-off valves or bypass valves on the blower assembly? Because that will make a big difference. That's one of the tests that we're going to do. I forgot to tell you guys about that. Jimmy and I were talking, and we have the turbo kit on there, the prototype basically for a turbo kit, and it didn't have a blow-off valve on it for a long time. And so once he got going and raising the boost up and making more and more power, that it would want to blow tubing off on the D cell because you get the buildup of pressure. And one of the things I've never done that we're going to do is I want to measure how much pressure that is. So if you're running, let's say you're running 14 or 15 pounds of boost, and then you snap the throttle shut, how big is that pressure spike? So we're going to measure that and see what it is, and basically just to illustrate why a blow-off valve is such a good idea, on why that is so hard on the turbo when the pressure wave goes back from hitting the wall being the closed throttle blade, and reverses back toward the turbo, and then attempts to take the turbo that's spinning really, really fast and says, hey, guess what? Yeah, you're not doing that anymore. I'm going that way. I know I should be going that way, but now I'm coming back this way, and I'm going to try to stop you. I'm going to bend all of your blades and cavitate you and do all sorts of terrible things. And so we want to, I'm just curious to see what the spikes would be in that. Because as we know, if you have flow and you have a resistance to flow, that's how we create boost. And so I think the boost is probably pretty high in that situation. Found a gear vendor's overdrive, San Diego, for the factory that makes it. 3,500 with shipping. They said it will make my 410 gears like a 305 when it's on. Yeah, what is it? Is it 60%, 70%? What's the overdrive? I thought it was like 70. M122 has a bypass. There wasn't any spike in the map at the data log. Yeah, we've broken them on the dyno. We've broken, and that's where they break. They break this, it breaks the spokes in the center, and the outer ring basically comes off. The hub still stays there. And we've broken 2 of them on the engine dyno. I just kind of put it down to, these are 100, 200, 300,000 mile junkyard motors. And I have no idea when these things are being, if I took it out, I'm fairly careful. But if we have guys take them out, you don't know if they set it on there or it hit there, or, you just don't know what and I don't know what the longevity of these things is anyway. And then when you're asking it to drive a whole bunch more, because you're putting a whole bunch more load now on that damper, and it was designed by GM to drive the accessories, not to drive something that, especially if you're really spinning the blower up, that may take 100 horsepower worth of load to drive. It's not designed to do that. And so, problems can happen, which is probably why the ATI guys exist. I like the ATI because they do good work over there. I'm putting one of those on a 5.3 that we have. But it'll be interesting to see. Can the turbo ever be too responsive? No. 62, yes. 38. Jimmy was really excited about how responsive the thing is. He's like, wow, this thing goes. And the interesting thing, the part of the conversation that we had when we were talking about this, first, obviously, we're very excited that it's out and running around on the street, and so we could get real world, evaluation on after running it on the chassis dyno. Because even on the chassis dyno, and this is one of the other things I want to talk about tonight, is even on the chassis dyno, depending on how because you can change the load on this dyno. So depending on how you apply the load to it, that's going to help determine what the response rate of the turbo is. And we saw this, and this is a mistake that I made when we were running on the engine dyno, when we did the very first evaluation and we were comparing the 3584 RS and the G42. We weren't really comparing them. We just wanted to show people, hey, look, this is a 700 or 800 horsepower turbo. This is a 1200 horsepower turbo. And that, one of them, even at the same boost level, obviously makes more, but it's less responsive. But in that display, we basically had full boost with both of them at the load-in point of, let's say it's 3,000 RPM or whatever. And so a lot of people get confused about that because they think that, oh, well, that G42 is just better everywhere. Well, it certainly makes it more power. It can make more power. But because it had the artificial load of the dyno, it was all in, basically. It was already making boost on the load in on a stationary load, but you don't ever get that stationary load, certainly in the lower gears. And that's one of the things that Jimmy pointed out. He's been doing turbo stuff for a long time. He's like, this thing's making boost in first gear. He said there's, especially on a 4060E, first gear in that thing, there's not a lot of load there. And so, in the lower gears and the higher gears, you roll into it and you get more load, just like with the dyno, and you get boost. But even in first gear, this thing is ultra responsive. But in that engine dyno test, we have lots of load because we go, wah, and then release it, and then it starts going through its sweep. But you don't ever get that like power braking at wide open throttle against a stop where only the motor is going up to whatever RPM is you have for the start. You just don't ever get that anywhere on the street. And turbos love that. They love the load. They love, all of the flow. They love all the turbo heat. And so it artificially shows something that is not happening out on the street, even on a chassis dyno, out in the real world or whatever. Because there obviously is a difference in turbo response rate between the two turbos. Otherwise, we would just have one. And one of them is smaller, can make less power, but is more responsive. The other one, bigger, can make more power, not as responsive. And so that's why you have to choose. But I think that that's a mistake that I made in the video that I did in that testing by showing the horsepower curves the way that I showed it. I'm like, look, at 15 pounds or whatever, the G42, makes more power, because we're starting to run out of turbo, certain hot side, cold side, both of them, with the smaller turbo. And the bigger turbo is like, hey, look, I'm just getting started. We're only 2/3 of the way there. We're ready to party. But the beginning part of that isn't showing what the reality is, the difference between those two turbos. So it artificially showed better for the bigger turbo than it did for the smaller turbo, because the engine dyno is not a great place to show response rate unless you had a really, really big disparity between the turbos in terms of response rate. It's just not really going to show that well. Dual keyways, found a gear fenders. For the replacement balancer, there are over and under driven lists. What's your take on those? You're just going to be changing the, I don't know if you're driving the blower off of the one serpentine belt. If you do it, you're going to be slowing or speeding up everything that's there. If everything is driven off of the same 6-rib serpentine belt, the alternator, the water pump, all of that stuff, you'll either, if you slow those down, if you put a smaller one on, or you'll speed them all up. Speeding up the blower, positive thing. You're going to get more power in doing that. But if you don't have just a dedicated blower drive pulley, you'll also speed everything else up. So if you speed the water pump up and the alternator, the AC is going to be separate, because that's going to be that's a pulley that's back behind this stuff normally. At least it is on the ATI stuff. But that's still on the factory stuff too. The AC is not driven off of that outer one. So I don't know what they did with the AC one. If they didn't change the diameter of that, it's not going to affect the AC, but it will affect the other things. So you speed them up. So you lose a little bit of power from over speeding those, but you'll gain power from over speeding the blower, because you spin the blower faster, you'll make more boost. Has there been a wraparound ring? Yeah, the total seal zero gap things have that, where they just, one lays on top of each other. They have little indents or whatever, and that works fine. But I don't see anybody running turbo things running that kind of ring though. We've seen the new 911 turbo design, electric spool and no wastegate to harvest electrons back to the battery. I haven't looked at the technology for that. It's pretty cool though. I mean, that would be the way to do it. And they had been doing that in Formula One for quite a while. Maybe they've got Porsche would be a good one to do that, because it's still a fairly expensive car. So you have enough where people will spend the money on that. And having a turbo spool up immediately would be great. It'd be better than a supercharger, because it's, well, I don't know what the drive is for the electronics portion of that, but you're kind of outsourcing the drive power for that. So I'm sure that they all did their homework. And no wastegate. So are they, if they're not using a wastegate, are they regulating boost then just by impeller speed, by controlling impeller speed electronically? And I guess you could do that if it's attached to a drive. You could do that. That's interesting technology. And then, because it's not driven off of the crank, I don't know if it is. I'd have to look and see, but it's not a supercharger. Is it still a turbo if it's driven electronically? Get away, what's going on? Stay Coda, saw your post, try cleaning the ground for the bank one, just a suggestion. Yeah, it sounds like it's electronic. Gear Render's overdrive adds an OD, but can also make a 3-speed into a 6-speed. Yeah, you can have intermediate gears because you can have an overdrive in each of those gears. It's pretty cool. So I'll use hot exhaust to make power on the 911. Then how are they regulating it then? Just got home from work. Super glad to be here. My favorite evening ritual, watching the live feed. There you go. It's good stuff. Took the dogs for a hike up in the hills today. Got to see some turkeys, lots of squirrels. Good stuff. I always look for turtles when we're going. We have a bridge that we cross across a little creek that's there. Sometimes we'll see the turtles sitting up on the logs and stuff that are in there. It's pretty cool. Every once in a while, we'll find a snake over there. It's pretty hot still. You get to go there early in the morning, or I don't think we've ever gone over there getting into nighttime. That's a good time also. And to find one randomly when you're walking on a trail that's frequented by lots of people on bikes and cars. I mean, not cars, but people walking and dogs and all kinds of stuff. The snakes tend to stay away from that. It's just a timing intersection thing. We know that there's lots of snakes up there because there's a bunch, but the being in the right place at the right time, it's definitely the right place, but you have to be there at the right time. Near. 64% are saying no, it cannot be too responsive. Yeah, my guess is, judging by how Jimmy was describing it and looking at the video stuff, it seems almost like a factory turbo setup. Do you need bigger injectors for a Truck Plus cam and a 6-liter with 243 heads? Yeah, an LQ4 doesn't have a very big injector, unfortunately. And then if you're ever thinking of putting a turbo on, you're going to have the thing tuned anyways, which we will have tunes for that. But if you're going to think about having boost in the future, then step up to a good size injector now. Too responsive, just drive like a bigger engine. Sounds great to me. Yeah, it is. I mean, if you can have part throttle boost, basically what you have is more torque. In fact, we were talking about it, and he said, yeah, this thing's so responsive. We're getting boost like that 2,000 RPM or whatever. I said, okay, well, but when you guys did the tune, or when you were running it on the chassis dyno, I said, you never ran it there. So I said, what is the air fuel at 2,000 and what is the timing at 2,000 when you have boost? I mean, they set everything up so it should be okay. I said, since we weren't there when we're running it on the engine dyno, we're never at 2,000, and it is on the street. I said, just, since it has boost there, you got to make sure that everything's okay. What size injector minimum? Well, I wouldn't do it that way, but if the Truck Plus is going to add 60, 70 horsepower, which it does, you're going to need something that will support that. Usually the minimum that people would do, you could put most people put 80s in them, but you could put if it's just going to stay NA, another good choice is we have 50 pounders that are the flex fuel injectors, and they're designed for the truck so that they go right in with the factory rail and the factory truck intake manifold. So we have those as well. Or you can also go find them in wrecking yards. Sometimes it's hard to find that specific flex fuel motor that has those injectors, and those will work. On the too responsive question, wouldn't that also indicate it may be borderline too small? It depends. It depends on what you're wanting. That the too small is like having, it's purely subjective. Is it too small? Like a camshaft is too small. like guys want, the bottom of the page camshaft. They want the 230, 240, 260 at 50 or whatever the big camshaft is, and they don't want a 205, 210, 218, whatever. They don't want that. So that in their view, it's too small, and that would be the same kind of thing. LSA is overlooked in responsibility and responsiveness in any type of build. I'm not sure I know what you mean by that. 36-pound injectors are minimum, like Kerrs. I think it's exhaust driven, but can boost impeller like regenerative braking. Well, if that's the case, it has to have some sort of drive attached to the wheel. I used to work in the junkyard and found Cadillac Escalade 50-pound flex fuels had like 6 holes for the sprays. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that so much. Just you need to make sure that you get enough fuel, and that's the critical thing. If you're making more power, you gotta have the fuel to support it. Otherwise, it won't work. In fact, it would be way worse having the extra power or the extra power potential with a camshaft and not having the fuel than not have. Would be way worse than having not having the camshaft. I have LFA injectors off of an NBSS 08 Yukon. Thinking about doing a manifold swap, but I want to say stock truck manifold. A couple of things to be concerned with if you're doing the Trailblazer SS or new body style one, whatever. I don't know if that's a is that a rec port manifold? Or also your throttle body is going to be a concern, and then if you have the fuel rail that goes along with that the intake manifold, then that's otherwise that's a concern. I was wondering if you could help me with some questions. I'm building a turbo 5.3 95 Camaro. I was planning to put a VS Racing 70, 75, 78 or 78, 75. A 78, 75 is not going to support 1,000 wheel horsepower unless it's a newer generation of that. It would have to be a Gen 2 or Gen 2.5 or next gen. The Viron does good stuff over there, but it'd be a 78, 75 and not a 75, 78. Or you could just get our G42. Jimmy and I were having a discussion the other day about V-band exhaust housings. And sometimes the conversations with V-band stuff, and we've talked about this before. All of the stuff that I did was T3, T4, T6 sometimes, which was kind of silly. But the V-band stuff, not so much. For a lot of guys want to find out, is it more responsive? I don't know. We'd have to look at the hole size and the surface area and that kind of stuff. But that's not the thing that I would be concerned about with a V-band exhaust housing. Having the V-band is really, really nice for mounting it and being able to orient the turbo on any kind of exhaust manifold or, in the engine bay. And then also, and this is more important for us, I think, or people like us, that would be testing or trying different things, taking the turbo on and off with a T4 flange or a T3 flange or a T6 flange. One of the things, like I said, it limits where the turbo can go. Once you have that flange, on a manifold that's welded or whatever, the turbo can only go right there. So you better have made sure that when you did that it's in that position, that the turbo is right. Otherwise, like I said, with the V-band, you can kind of move around. But also, if you're taking it on and off for any reason, like we do, testing different things, then with a V-band, it's like one thing. It's one bolt. And you undo the V-band, and you got to take off the other things that are on the turbo, but you have to do that anyways on any T4 or T6 or T3 flange. But trying to get to all of the bolts on a T3, T4, or T6 flange, or T28, if you have that kind of thing. And we were laughing that when you go to there's always one bolt that's difficult because of the way that the housing is. And so it's hard to get to. It's hard to access. Even if the turbo was off of the motor, or off of the manifold, it's hard to access. When it's installed, getting a wrench in there or whatever. In fact, we were laughing that Jimmy said, yeah, we used to just drill the holes out, because we getting it to line up and getting the bolt in there and getting a wrench or socket or whatever you could do to get in there, because we would just make the hole bigger and put a smaller bolt in, a through bolt, and go in there, and it'd just be easier. I said, I did that so many times on the dyno. I said, it's so much easier. He said, yeah, that's just the third one, and you have a flange that's really, really thick anyways. And so you're just, you just tighten it in it, and it's just fine. And it works out good. But those are the big things for me, is that, and even when I did, like, I have adapters that go T3, T4, T6, but they go from a V band. So I can bolt the turbo on, like when I do stuff on the engine dyno, but I can also kind of move it around, at least this way and that way, and get the thing to work. Sometimes I have to move it around because of the intercooler configuration, or because the exhaust doesn't have the bend in it that I need to miss the valve cover or whatever. And so the V-band stuff for that just seems to make, certainly for fitment, seems to make it a little bit easier for me. Got the Truck Plus cam and spring kit. I'm going to go with the low buck truck cam and spring kit so I can cam my 6-liter. There you go. If the goal is 1,000 horsepower with response, then you need the biggest engine you can get for the budget. Yeah, a 6-liter with 1,000 wheel horsepower turbo will be more responsive than a 5.3 or 4.8. Got the number switch. I'm at 7875. Yeah, and it's got to be like I said, it's got to be a new generation 7875, and some of those will go to 1,000 horsepower. Corky Bell book, he compares the Turbo Z to a 911, if I remember it, and says the Z car was engineered for general public on the street, while the Porsche maximized total performance. It depends on what year that is. The 911 turbos were, at least when Corky wrote his book, were probably still air cooled and ultra low compression. And if you look at the original 911 turbos, they had what's called a pancake manifold, and it was terrible. Which is better for a daily driver, LQ4, low buck cam, or Truck Plus? If you're just doing an NA one, maybe a low buck truck. But like I said, Jimmy's driving around with this thing with a Truck Plus and with the turbo, with that small turbo. It works great. What's a 480? An S480? A turbo? I have an 06 Silverado 4.8. Did the 07 to 13 intake with injectors that came from the 06, not the ones from the 7 to 13. Ever since hard, had like some bogging issues of 20 miles an hour. But did you have it retuned for a different injector size? Because you can't just swap injectors and hope that it works. It doesn't work that way. It has been tuned. Okay, I see it. And a cam too. Okay, as long as it's been tuned, yeah. Yeah, getting the tune right for the low speed and drivability stuff, way more important than the wide open throttle stuff. And I see that when we're dyno testing, the wide open throttle stuff is like, that's 5 or 6 pulls, and all of that's done. It's ready to go. I can't make any more power. But when you put a camshaft in, particularly with a stock ECU, you gotta kind of know what you're doing, because there are so many interrelated tables that affect each other. Mine with a stall as well. It needs a tune just to run. Michael, what's going on? You still got 12 minutes left or so. Can a turbo ever be too responsive? 5644. We're dropping on the nose. The yeses are coming up. $5.7 LS1, good candidate for a turbo. Street car cruiser. Already have an 05 LM7. Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make a lot of power, I wouldn't pick an LS1 just because of the block. But if you're trying to make 600 or 700 horsepower, yeah, it's fine. It works as good as every other one. And a 5.7 will have better boost response than an LM7 will, than a 5.3, because it's bigger, and so it makes more low-speed power. The engine sits for 2 years. It'd be like you could spin a bearing if you don't pre-lube it before starting. Not usually. But if it makes you feel better to pre-lube it beforehand, it would be fine. But we have engines sit for a really long time and just run them. 20 years ago, I read the Corky Bell book. I think his point of the comparison was the too small turbo was what most people take advantage of. Yeah, factory stuff is always sized for, because people want, like somebody said earlier, what people want out of their small turbo motor is for it to feel like a big motor, for it to feel like a bigger naturally aspirated motor. So they want immediate boost, basically. You want, some of these things have immediate boost at, I don't know, 1500 RPM or whatever, because they want it to be really, really, they want it to feel and drive like a big motor. And so that works out really, really well, is at an OEM level that they can do stuff like that. And so that works out really good. If you're trying to get, maximum power, it's like the 3584 versus the G42. If one of those can make, 4-digit power level, the other one cannot. What would you recommend instead of a 7875? Like I said, Viper makes good stuff. They got good stuff over there. I got nothing but good things to say about them. The turbo that you would look at if you want 1,000 wheel horsepower is our G42. So if you go to richardholdnerperformance.com, look at a G42, that will easily do that, and it's really responsive. We were running it on a 5.3 already, and it works great. An S480 is slightly bigger than an S475. Ever use cheap studs on a 5.3, or do you recommend ARP bolts? I always use ARP stuff because I like the guys there, and I've never ever had any problems with their stuff. I've run lots of motors on the Dyno with stock bolts. I've run a few with boost, reasonable boost, 10 pounds or whatever, with stock bolts. But like the L33 that we have, I just got ARP stuff. And Jimmy in the Tahoe, he just got ARP stuff because it's what you should have. Why do people claim the 6.1 Hemi to be so good for boost when in the end, if you build it or any other Hemi, they will perform? I don't know why they would think the 6.1 is better. Does the 6.1 have a forged crank or something else? It has really good exhaust manifolds, I can tell you that. And it has an aluminum intake manifold, but quite honestly, it loses power down low compared to the plastic, like I call it the Magnum intake manifold, compared to the 5.7 one. But yeah, any of the Hemis, they're really good. You put a cam in them, springs like you do in LS, you add boost to them, and they do exactly what every engine does. A 6.1 would be better than a 5.7 just because it's bigger. And also a 6.1, if it was a factory one, has a better camshaft, and it has more camshaft than the 5.7 does. Hope someday I can win the lottery. I can put turbos on my van and transmission with a lockup and a trans brake. Watching your live feed turbo sounds like so much fun. It is. Turbos are cool. Waiting out parts. They should arrive tomorrow. Then we can wire in the new MAF and finish the PCB. Getting a 427 LS3 on a dart block built by Texas Speed. Use your video on the performance design excess intake manifold. That's a good one. Texas Speed said to go with 103 millimeter throttle body opening versus the 112. Are you running boost on it? If you're not running boost on it, I would go with the bigger throttle body. Dead hooking at the track, boost at 1500, 2000 will get the vehicle moving. 3000 to 4000 takes a bit to regain RPM. It would, and if you were doing it at the track, I don't think that I would get the turbo to come on late, or if you did have a turbo that was sized to come on there, I would have it come on there with converter, gearing, two-step, whatever you had to do to get the thing to build the boost that you want, enough boost to launch the car. Shit for drivability. Are you putting a big cam in this? The only thing that's going to happen is it's going to feel more responsive, but you already have 103 millimeter and you have a 427. So I honestly doubt that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a 103 and a 112. I don't think you'd see that much difference between those two. And not in terms of drivability. I'm new here. Are you familiar with Blueprint engines? Yes, I've tested lots of those. No boost, go with a 103. Why? That's the reverse of what you should have said. Going in a it's not going in a 1959 Mustang, maybe a 1995 Mustang. Is that what you meant to say? There's nothing wrong with putting a LS in a Mustang. And it's a 427, so you can just tell people like it's a camera motor or it's a side oiler or any kind of Ford like base 427. I have a Mustang. I have that's getting an LS. Not only that, it's an original owner Mustang. So close out our poll at 59% saying no. Can the turbo ever be too responsive? That's a negative. You just said if it's boost, go with a larger throttle body. No. What I said was if you're going to go boost, you don't need the bigger throttle body, just like we always say. If he was staying NA, he should go with the bigger throttle body and not the 100 and 103. If it's NA, he should go with the 112. So if I said something else, this is what I meant. 112 if it's NA, 103 if it's boost, because with boost, it's not going to make any difference. And I don't think there's going to be a big drivability difference between a 112 and a 103 on an NA 427. Are there mods I can do to a 383 or does it have to stay as it is? I'm kind of getting one fully dressed and ready to go. Just curious. I don't know which one you're getting, what the power output is, or what the heads are, or anything like that. So there are always things that you could do to change the motor. But do you need to? Does it already make the power that you want? You should offer some head bolt studs on your website. Yeah, we can get ARP stuff. I voted no because if the turbo is too responsive, that implies it's too restrictive up top. That's all relative. Any significant noticeable difference in speed density versus MAF tune in a street car, NA sub 400 horsepower? No, if both of them were tuned correctly, I don't think you'd notice any difference in drivability, if that's what you're talking about. There becomes a problem with MAF stuff like on the LS that if we get to the point like with the turbo stuff that we run out of mass air meter. So then they have to go to a speed density deal where we're running the map sensor. That way, then you can make whatever power you want. Are you located in Arizona? No. There. A 66 Mustang sedan in my backyard. Has the 300 horsepower, 40 over 302, big valve head, 10.5 to 1 compression. You like Diamondbacks? I like Diamondback rattlesnakes. If I only want 700 horsepower from a 500 horsepower NA motor, should I go for your small turbo? No. If you have a 408, you should put a G42 on it. Go to a dual pump hat. How much power are you trying to make, Richard? A 408 should have a G42 on it. Been there since 95. I blew up the C4 trans, ran 13 O's at Palmdale in the late 80s. Nice. So that was making power. What heads does it have on it? What big valve heads does it have on it? Does it have like 194 hypo 289 heads on it or something? I think that those Chevy valve sizes were a common upgrade on the Ford heads. Excited for your turbo kit. I'm planning on buying as well as a G42 cam, wanting 1,000 mil horsepower. Yeah, that's really easy. Got one more minute. G42, G40 deuce. We offer the log style manifold on the store. Yeah, for our turbo kits, we will. HP ported 289, 4V heads, a 202. Oh, a 202 valve in there? Interesting. Will you do a Ford version? A Ford version of the turbo manifold? No, that's not planned. Richard, what's your recommendation for acquiring bracketry for the 302? I need alternator, AC, crank, and water pump on the cheap. The wrecking yard would be the way where I would go get it. Have my personal 6-liter gens stock bottom end with heads be best with a 260 or 257 and going CID, AccuFab F80 pound injectors, and F38 cam. I don't know what an F38 cam is. On that note, though, it is time to go. But I will see you guys all tomorrow.